I want you to take a second and picture your life right now. Just really step back and look at it from the outside.
Yeah, try to view it as an observer.
Right. And chances are everything looks, well, for lack of a better word, it looks correct. You know, you probably went through the expected education.
You got the degree?
Exactly. You secured a reliable career. You've spent years building this foundation of stability, and you have a daily routine that just keeps everything humming along.
You're checking all the boxes.
By all external metrics, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. But quietly, beneath all of that outward success and predictability, maybe you feel this incredibly subtle, almost invisible internal misalignment.
It's a really specific feeling.
It is. I like to think of it as wearing a wonderfully tailored, highly expensive shirt that just happens to have one terribly itchy thread on the inside collar.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
Right. Because nobody else can see it. To the rest of the world, you look incredibly put together, but you can feel that thread every single time you move.
It's a profoundly common human experience, and yet, well, it's one that can feel incredibly isolating when you're the one actually going through it. You look around at the life you've built, a life that, by all accounts, is highly functional, productive, secure.
Yeah.
And you can't quite articulate why it suddenly feels like you're wearing someone else's clothes. There's a deep psychological dissonance that happens when your external reality no longer matches your internal state.
Which brings us to the core of today's deep dive. We are exploring a phenomenon we're calling the moment humans start questioning everything.
It's such a pivotal moment.
It really is. And we're basing our discussion today on some absolutely fascinating insights extracted from a text called The Awakening of Conscious Authorship.
A fantastic source.
Yeah. And the goal here is pretty straightforward. We want to understand why we suddenly start questioning our life's default script, why society is so quick to mislabel this exact moment as a crisis, and most importantly, how recognizing this uncomfortable moment for what it actually is might just be the absolute key to true freedom.
It reframes everything.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with this idea of the correct path. The framework we're analyzing today points out that for a huge chunk of our lives, we follow a path that appears completely logical, resting on four massive pillars: education, career, stability, and routine.
Those four pillars are essentially the bedrock of modern societal expectation. I mean, from a very young age, the trajectory is presented to us as a simple, almost mathematical equation.
Right, like an input-output system.
Exactly. You acquire the right education, which unlocks the right career. That career provides financial and social stability, and then that stability allows you to establish a predictable, comfortable routine. It's a formula specifically designed by human societies to optimize survival and minimize risk.
But let's play devil's advocate for a second here. Optimizing survival and minimizing risk isn't inherently a bad thing, right?
Not at all.
I mean, society pushes those pillars for a reason. They keep a roof over our heads, they feed our families, they keep the lights on. If someone is looking at your resume or your social media profile, they see those pillars and think, wow, they have really got it together.
Absolutely.
So why does the underlying material suggest that leaning on these pillars eventually leads to this stark internal misalignment?
Because surviving is not the same thing as consciously living.
Wow. Yeah.
And the psychological weight of that realization is heavy. You're operating within a structure that you've spent years, perhaps decades, working incredibly hard to build. You've invested your time, your physical energy, a massive portion of your identity into this logical path.
Right. You're fully bought in.
Yes. So when that itchy thread of misalignment arises, the immediate reaction is almost always confusion, heavily layered with guilt. People think, I have everything I'm supposed to have, I'm safe, I'm secure. Why on earth aren't I satisfied?
You end up feeling like you're somehow failing at being happy with a perfectly good life.
Yeah.
You think you're just being ungrateful.
Precisely. You internalize it as a flaw in yourself. And what's fascinating here is that this shift rarely arrives dramatically. It's almost never the cinematic moment where someone flips over their desk at the office and storms out to move to a cabin in the woods.
Right. It's not a movie scene.
No, it often appears quietly as a persistent, lingering question in the back of the mind during mundane moments. It's a slow, quiet realization that just builds up over time.
It's sitting at your desk on a random Tuesday, staring at a spreadsheet you've stared at 1,000 times before, and the question just gently floats into your head.
Exactly that.
And the source material actually pinpoints the exact types of questions that begin to surface during this phase. I want to share them. And as you listen right now, I want you to really ask yourself if you have ever felt these bubble up in your own mind. The questions are, why am I doing this? Is this the life I truly chose? Or did I simply follow the structure that was presented to me?
Those three questions are immensely powerful because they represent the active dismantling of an illusion, specifically the illusion of autonomous choice.
The idea that we're completely in control.
Yes, we walk around believing we're the architects of our lives, but those questions force us to reckon with how much of our blueprint was actually drafted by someone else.
I was thinking about that last question. Did I simply follow the structure that was presented to me? And the best way I can describe it is like following a pre-programmed GPS in your car.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Imagine you get into the driver's seat of your life at 18 years old, and the destination is already typed in. The voice on the system says, in 500 feet, go to college. So you put your blinker on and turn right.
You're just following instructions.
Right. Then it says, in 2 miles, secure a corporate job. So you merge onto the highway, in 10 miles, get a mortgage. You just keep following the voice. You're making the turns, you're pressing the gas pedal, you're the one dealing with the traffic. So it genuinely feels like you are driving.
It feels active.
It feels like you're making choices, but you never actually zoomed out to look at the map. You never stopped to ask who typed the destination into the GPS in the first place.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize what the material calls presented structures. We're all born into existing frameworks. These are cultural norms, familial expectations, economic systems, historical contexts.
Stuff we don't even realize is there.
Exactly. For the first part of our lives, we simply don't have the cognitive maturity, the financial independence, or the sheer life experience to question them. We just adapt to them. We assume the menu of options we're handed by our parents, our teachers, our culture is the entire universe of possibility.
Think about a highly successful corporate lawyer. They might wake up at age 45, partner at their firm making great money, and suddenly realize they only went to law school because when they were 12 years old, they argued with their sibling, and their parents praised them, saying, "Oh, you're so good at debating, you should be a lawyer."
A single offhand comment.
Right. They took that tiny piece of praise, internalized it as a presented structure, and spent the next 30 years building a stressful, demanding life around a casual comment.
That happens more often than we'd like to admit. And so when a person finally asks, is this the life I truly chose? They are for the first time differentiating between active selection and passive compliance.
Passive compliance, that's a strong phrase.
They're recognizing that they've been exceptionally good at executing a plan, but they weren't the author of that plan.
But pulling over the car and finally looking at the map is terrifying. Once you realize you didn't draw the map, the road you're on starts to look a lot less stable. Which brings us to the next undeniably uncomfortable phase of this awakening. The systems that provided you with absolute certainty for your entire adult life suddenly start to look incredibly flimsy.
The material focuses heavily on the disorientation of this phase. It points out three specific pillars of our internal lives that usually feel completely permanent, but suddenly become flexible during this shift: our careers, our identities, and our goals.
Let's push on that a bit, because lumping those three together is intense. Your career is how you pay your bills. Your identity is who you see in the mirror. Your goals are the entire reason you get out of bed in the morning.
They are everything.
For most of a human life, those three elements act as the major load-bearing walls of our psychological house.
They hold up the entire structure of your reality, and humans are fundamentally pattern-seeking creatures. We neurologically crave structure, predictability, and permanence because they minimize our cognitive load. They protect us from the chaotic, exhausting unknown.
It's safe.
Very safe. When you know exactly who you are, what you do for a living, and where you're going, your brain doesn't have to work as hard.
So when those load-bearing walls suddenly feel flexible, it's not a relief. We say the word flexible like it's a fun yoga pose, but when your identity becomes flexible, you might literally not know who you are when you wake up in the morning. The psychological ground beneath you essentially turns to liquid.
It's a massive cognitive load. We really shouldn't gloss over how painful the shedding of that old skin is. When a career or an identity becomes subject to change, open to interpretation, and no longer absolute, the anxiety can be paralyzing. You are losing the very metrics you use to measure your own worth.
Which is exactly why society is so quick to label this a crisis. It's the classic midlife crisis or the quarter-life crisis. We look at someone who is deeply questioning their stable job or suddenly unsure of their chosen identity. And the collective reaction is, oh, they're having a crisis. Something has broken down and gone terribly wrong.
It's pathologized.
Yes. And I want to pause here for a second and speak directly to you listening. If you are currently in the middle of this phase, if the things you thought were permanent are suddenly wobbly, if you feel like you're losing your grip on who you are and you are deeply, profoundly uncomfortable, this framework validates that experience entirely. You are not broken. You are not malfunctioning.
Labeling it a crisis is actually quite damaging. The word implies a systemic malfunction. It implies that the machine is breaking down and needs to be urgently, frantically repaired so it can return to its previous state of rigid, unthinking stability. It encourages people to suppress the questions and just get back to work.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The insights we're unpacking today introduce a massive paradigm shift. What if we completely flip the script on this? What if this deep disorientation isn't a breakdown at all, but rather the very first moment of conscious authorship?
Conscious authorship is the perfect term for this. It fundamentally reframes the entire human experience we are discussing. If the first part of life is about unconscious participation, blindly following the presented structure and flawlessly reciting the default script, then this incredibly uncomfortable moment of questioning is the ultimate transition point.
It's a graduation.
It is. You are stepping out of the role of the actor who is merely reciting inherited lines on a stage someone else built, and you're stepping into the role of the playwright.
You're finally picking up the pen. You realize that the script isn't locked in a vault somewhere. You can actually cross things out. If you begin questioning the default script of your life, you are inherently gaining the ability to redesign it.
But redesigning a life requires a completely different set of tools than maintaining a life. And the transition from maintaining to designing requires a fundamental shift in how your brain operates daily.
I want to dig into how we actually make that shift, because it can't be as simple as just deciding one day to be the author. The material breaks this down into two distinct before and after states. The first major shift is that curiosity has to replace automatic behavior. And we think about it, that makes perfect sense. If you're authoring your life, you can't be on autopilot.
Automatic behavior is the absolute hallmark of the default script. Think about the average morning. You wake up to the same alarm, you drink the same coffee, you commute the exact same route, you perform the same tasks, and you seek the same conventional markers of success, all without active critical thought.
You're just a passenger.
Completely. It is highly energy efficient for the brain, but it's entirely closed off to new information.
It's surviving, not exploring. But how do we just switch on curiosity when we're stressed about our flexible identities?
You do it by changing the fundamental question you ask yourself. When automatic behavior is in charge, you wake up and ask, what am I supposed to do today? You are looking for instructions. When curiosity replaces it, you stop asking what you were supposed to do and you start asking, what is actually possible today?
That's a huge shift in perspective.
It changes everything. Curiosity is an active seeking state. It looks at the flexible career or the newly ambiguous identity, and instead of panicking about the lack of structure, it wonders, what else could this be?
Instead of automatically assuming you have to just grit your teeth and climb the next rung on the corporate ladder, curiosity pauses and asks, wait, do I even like ladders? What if I want to build a boat instead? And that leads right into the second major shift the framework identifies. Awareness has to replace assumption.
Assumptions are the invisible guardrails of the presented structure. They keep us safely on the pre-programmed GPS route without us ever noticing them. We assume we must work in a specific industry until we are 65. We assume success looks like a certain type of house or a certain tax bracket. We assume our current identity is fixed and unchangeable.
Awareness, on the other hand, is the act of pulling the car over and actually looking at the map. It's looking at the environment, looking at your internal state, and recognizing the reality of your choices.
Yeah.
If you swap out assumption for awareness, you are no longer reacting to a fabricated, inherited idea of how life should be. You are finally responding to the reality of how life actually is.
And when you do that, the entire purpose of your daily existence shifts. You move away from a life dedicated to maintaining stability, and you move toward a life dedicated to exploring possibility.
Let's expand on that, because the contrast between maintaining stability and exploring possibility is huge. Maintaining stability feels like you've built this massive fortress, and your whole life is just pacing the perimeter, guarding the walls. You're constantly stressed, looking out for threats, hoping the wind doesn't blow too hard, hoping the economy doesn't crack your foundation. It's a highly defensive way to live.
It is entirely defensive. You are protecting what you have acquired, avoiding risks, and ensuring tomorrow looks exactly like yesterday. But exploring possibility is inherently expansive. When you recognize that those load-bearing walls are actually flexible, you realize you do not need to fiercely guard them. You can push them outward. You can dismantle a wall that no longer serves you and build a window or an entirely new wing of the house. You move from a state of fear-based protection to a state of creative exploration.
It's the difference between playing a game just trying not to lose versus actually playing the game to see what incredible things might happen. And this is the journey we've been tracking today. We start with that tiny, uncomfortable itch of internal misalignment. We move through the terrifying phase of questioning the default script where everything feels wobbly. We navigate the so-called crisis of flexibility, and we finally emerge into conscious authorship. And the ultimate result of all this dismantling and rebuilding. The core argument here is that this specific moment, the moment a human begins questioning everything, is the actual beginning of true freedom.
And we need to be careful with the term true freedom because it's frequently misunderstood as simply the financial or physical ability to do whatever you want. But within the context of conscious authorship, true freedom is much deeper and much more profound. It is the psychological freedom from the invisible constraints of the presented structure. It is the freedom to actually be the author of your own existence, rather than merely playing a supporting character in a story written by your culture, your parents, or your societal expectations.
So what does this all mean? It means that if you were sitting there today, looking at your outwardly correct life, and feeling that quiet, persistent drumbeat of the big questions, why am I doing this? Did I truly choose this path? Who typed the destination into my GPS? You need to know that you are not at the end of your stability. You are standing at the starting line of your autonomy. You have the power, starting right now, to transition from automatic behavior to genuine curiosity. You can move from blind assumption to clear awareness. You have the terrifying, beautiful ability to redesign the script.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this single quiet moment of questioning alters the entire trajectory of a human life. It forces you to redefine how you interact with your career, how you construct your identity, and how you set your goals. It transforms the human experience from a passive, defensive ride into an active, creative pursuit. And this raises an important question.
I'm intrigued. Where does this go next?
Based on everything we have unpacked today, we know that this deeply uncomfortable period of questioning is defined as the first moment of conscious authorship. It is the initial realization that you hold the pen. But if that is only the first moment, what does the second or third draft of a consciously authored life actually look like? Once you have fully embraced that life is about exploring possibility rather than desperately maintaining stability, does the questioning ever truly stop? Or does constant joyful revision simply become your brand new default script?
What an incredible thought to leave on. A life not of rigid permanence, but of constant joyful revision. Take a look at your own script today, see where the assumptions are hiding, and whatever you do, keep questioning everything. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.